Here he stopped and appeared about to say something else regarding crabs, but what came out was, "But now let's look at the Bellini." We entered the church, and I found almost without willing it that I had dipped my finger in the marble stoop of holy water at the door and crossed myself. We stood in silence in front of the altarpiece for a long time, until Maurice sighed deeply and said, "Quite aside from its quality as a work of art, this makes me feel better about my present decrepit age. He was 75 when he painted it, can you imagine? Do you know his nude with a mirror? I saw it when I was a kid in Vienna. His only nude, and he did it when he was 85. Marvelous painting, and at 85. I guess he figured it was safe by then. Indeed, sadly safe. But now this. How can one do that? To paint the very air around the figures. There is the whole world of the Renaissance in one painting. You could say with justice that Giovanni Bellini started the Renaissance, in this city, at least in painting, and carried it through decade after decade. Incredible. He started painting like Giotto and ended like Titian, who of course was his pupil, as was Giorgione, and always deep, deep thought from a lost age underlying the contemporary style. So he shows us the Virgin and Child all the way back at the rear of the niche, and no one is looking at them. The angel is sawing away at the viola, and she and Saints Peter and Jerome are facing us, not the Virgin. And Saints Lucy and Catherine there in the middle distance are also lost in contemplation. Whatever was he thinking? In nearly every other altarpiece in the world, the Virgin is the center of attention for all the other figures. But not here. Maybe they're just thinking about her. It's a study of contemplation, an example to us who can't see the Virgin at all. Yes, that's a good reading, and the art historical subtext is that if you're a true artist, like Bellini, you must keep at it, and keep your spirit open, and the art will feed you, if you let it. Lottie tells me you had some trouble in New York. What did she tell you? Oh, no details, but she suggested that you might be wise to seek the services of a psychiatrist. And this is the reason you looked me up? To check out if I was really nuts? Only partially, he said with a disarming smile, and I shall be happy to report you seem perfectly sane. Are you doing any of your own painting, by the way? I don't know, Maurice. Sometimes I think, what's the point? What does work of my own mean anymore? I look at this thing and there's a whole coherent culture embodied in it. The illusionistic space, the theatricality, like a stage set, the atmosphere. Like you said, he's learned how to paint air, and he can do it because the art and technique are in service of something greater than the artist. But now there's nothing greater than the artist. The artist is it. And the critics, and the investment potential. If I did something like this, except as a parody, it would be called kitsch. And it would be kitsch. We don't believe in the Virgin and the saints anymore, or at least not the way Bellini did. Our icons are blank, and the only religion we see in the galleries is irony. I can do irony fine, but it makes me sick. Yes, but my dear man, there is a flourishing school of modern figurative painting, what Kittai called the School of London. Himself, Bacon, Lucian Freud, Auerbach. If you want to paint that way, why not do it? But I don't want to paint that way. Gin up a little individual style and sell it to fools. I want to paint like this. I want to paint in a culture that transcends the art that expresses it. And all that's gone. He nodded gravely. Yes, I take your point, and I don't have an answer to your problem. Still, we're standing here and we're having a certain experience. Neither of us, I think, are believers in the sense that Bellini was, and yet we are, at this moment, under his spell. Is it only admiration for his bravura? Are we merely worshipping his art? Or we're being drugged? You know what Duchamp said about art. Yes, as a drug it's probably useful for a number of people, very sedative, but as a religion it's not even as good as God. An interesting man, Duchamp, probably the major influence on the art of the past century after Cézanne, even though he produced very little work. I met him once, you know. Really? Yes, in New York. I was in Greenwich Village and I wanted a coffee, and the shop had only one free chair, so I asked the old man sitting there if I could use it. He had a chessboard in front of him, and he said I could sit there if I would give him a game, so I did. It was only after I sat down that I realized it was Duchamp. Did you win? Of course not. He was an international Grand Master. We played 3 games, and he won the last while spotting me 2 rooks. We did not, unfortunately, discuss art. I talked about what I have just been telling you, my work in the art recovery effort. And when I told him that there were dozens of masterpieces that had gone missing, do you know what he said? They are the fortunate ones. Everyone thought he'd given up painting entirely, but when he died, they found he'd been working on the same painting, a representational nude, for the last 20 years of his life. One looks at it through a peephole. What did he think of his artistic progeny? I wish I'd thought to ask him, but from what he wrote, I gather he didn't have much use for pop or conceptual art. As I imagine these people, the Virgin and the Saints, would not have had much use for what the Catholic Church became after their time. We are a bunch of silly monkeys after all, but what an astounding miracle it is that we can also make and enjoy things like this. After the kind of life I've led, you know, there are people who believe that after what Europe has done to itself in the 20th century, that vast catastrophe, we can no longer have poetry, have art, that this is all meaningless merde because it leads to the death camps. They have a point, I suppose, but as I was saying, after the kind of life I have led, here I am, in a church, looking at Bellini. Another kind of miracle, perhaps. I didn't know what to say to that, and after a moment he plucked his sleeve back and looked at his watch. And now, unfortunately, I must go. I have a meeting at 4, at the Gritti of all places. It's part of the Perpetuo EU Pagaia about how to save Venice and its treasures from the rising waters. I hope you succeed, I said. Perhaps we will. Or perhaps one day there will be fishes swimming through here nibbling at the painted saints. We went outside and found it had stopped raining. Winter sun struggled through the thinning clouds, lighting the facades of the church and the surrounding buildings with dramatic effect. Maurice looked about the campo, beaming in delight. Now we are in a canaletto ourselves, he said, and we embraced. Then he held me by the shoulders at arm's length and looked at me in the face. Chaz, I don't know the extent of your involvement with Herr Krebs, but I would urge you not to get in any further with him. Why? I thought you said he wasn't a crook. No, I said he had never been caught. It's not the same thing. But whatever his legal status at present, he's not a person you wish to know. Please, take my word for this. I finished the ceiling just before Christmas, and Castelli threw a party for the unveiling of the work. My patrono, I found, looked just like one of those cutthroat condottieri who ran Italy in the Quattrocento, a shark face in Armani, and came with an entourage of shady remoras and a blonde sweetie 20 years younger who wasn't Mrs. C trailing discreetly along. And looking like he fit right in was my old pal Mark Slotsky. So, shitloads of champagne, and later a gigantic 7-course meal under my fresco, a couple dozen rich people, jeweled women, politicians, and so on, and business fascist types. Zucconi informed me that the real Venetians had been invited but declined. All those Golden Book families weren't going to show up to gaze on Castelli's fake Tiepolo. I wasn't invited either. They set up a table in a dusty room near the kitchen for the help, of which I was one, because it was a restoration. The artist was Tiepolo, and he was dead. I mean, you wouldn't expect the plasterers or the scaffold guy to be in there with the fucking patrono. And you know, I didn't feel bad about it at all. I felt great. Maybe for the first time in my life I felt I was where I belonged. Guys slapped me on the back and kissed me, all like that. We had a great time, too. Had the same food, maybe better wine, courtesy of Zucconi, and got drunk and noisy. It was like the marriage of Figaro. The real life, decency, honesty, was below the stairs. Toward the end of the evening, Mark came in and went through an elaborate, and I thought totally phony apology about how it was outrageous I hadn't been seated in the frescoed hall, and I was like, "It's okay, Mark. I'm having a great time with the paisans." And then he kind of leaned close and said, "Castelli was real impressed with what you did. Amazed, really. He had no idea anyone could work like that. I mean, it's fucking perfect, that fresco. You can't tell it from a Tiepolo, except it's so fresh and clean." And I said, "Does that mean I'm getting paid?" He said, "Absolutely, the check's in my account as we speak. But listen, Chaz, this is just like the very beginning. 200 grand is chump change compared to what you could be pulling down with the right connections." Bigger ceilings? I said. No, there are guys here tonight who... And then he dropped his voice even lower, like there was anyone in the room who could speak English worth a damn, and he asked me, "How would you like to make $1 million?" Well, that got my attention. I said, "Who's going to pay me $1 million? And for what?" "Werner Krebs. He's here. He loves your work." And here I thought about what Maurice had said about the guy. He's shady but loves art. Something different from the usual art hag, and also different from a vulgarian semi-gangster like Castelli. And I decided that despite what Maurice had said, I did want to know him. So I said, "Okay, let's go." "No, not now. Tomorrow. Have you got some decent clothes?" I said no, and asked again what Werner was going to pay me $1 million for, but he said, "You'll talk to the man. We're on for tomorrow, but we need to get you cleaned up." He actually bought me an outfit the next morning. We went down to San Marco, Armani for the clothes, shoes at Bottega Veneta, the works, and a barber near the Daniele Hotel who eyed me carefully, like a fresco guy checking a decayed ceiling, and gave me a haircut, face steam, and shave. Then we took the Hotel Cipriani's private launch over to Giudecca and Krebs's suite there. Mark had been doing nervous chatter all morning, but when he got onto the boat, he clammed up. I thought he was seasick, but in retrospect I think he was just nervous. Or scared. I was scared too, but not of Krebs.